This is the September 24th, 2020 Verify Testing internal customer call. I've shared in the agenda the roadmap deck changes of note. Just some quick highlights I'll verbalize before we jump into other agenda topics. We've shipped the first iteration of the group test coverage data. So that builds up from the project data. You can get data for all of your projects within your group. And we have a feedback issue there. So if anyone internally is using it or external folks watching the video later, we'd love to get the feedback within that issue about that. That first iteration is being able to download the CSV, and then the team will be iterating on that to show the data in the table and a graph of all of the data over time, the average of all of your group's coverage data over time. And then our next big focus, kind of the epic that we are just wrapping up, is around the unit test report and showing data there. There's one more open issue there of displaying file name as part of the table. And then we'll have a little bit of follow-up cleanup just on the UI of that interface. But as we close out that epic, the next big focus for the team is going to be moving into the code quality category. Primarily the features that it will enable us to move our maturity up to viable. And one of the key components of that is the majority of internal customers are using the category. And so for me, that's the deep dive I want to get into today and understand from anybody on the call who has contributed to code quality issues or has open issues, what those issues are, making sure that the issues that we have identified for the epic are closing out the problems that are preventing them from using that feature internally. Before we do that, though, I want to make sure that Ricky has a chance to verbalize his point, as we talked about it on an earlier call this morning in their team refinement. So, Ricky, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Sure. Are you talking about the last bullet? Yeah. So I noticed that Albert's doing his fail-fast experiment with the kind of parallel fail-fast job running that then cancels the pipeline if it detects a failure. So I'm just very curious about the results for it. Is there like an issue or somewhere that you can share with us, Kyle, about any kind of results, or is it good? Is it bad? Is it saving time? Is it spending more time? Like what's the 411?
Yeah, so
really
I'm right now we're still gathering data. I'm trying to pull the issue. I'll add to it. I'll add to the agenda. We have a Sidestepping dashboard that pulls together the key metrics we're looking at. I thought it was in the issue you linked to, but I don't seem to see it. It's probably in our KR issue, which that's where I'm looking real quick. For now, I think it's not short-circuiting, so it's not failing the rest of the pipeline as much as we anticipated, but we are using a rudimentary mapping logic. So the next steps are really to move towards the dynamic test mapping identification that we had kind of I think we had chatted about probably 2 months back. That's something we'll look to continue to grow in Q4 so that we can really get to the point where we have high confidence that these impact jobs are catching the failures that would be caught in our RSpec jobs and start to move away from running every single test on every single MR. We'll run them in master, but in the MRs, we're trying to move in the direction of moving away from that. Give me just a second, and I will find I'll find that dashboard.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, I'm just also curious for your plan to start to do more dynamic analysis of what tests need to run. Are you kind of planning on generating a mapping file and then feeding that into TFF and kind of generating that mapping separately more dynamically, or is there thoughts about building that right into the TFF tool?
I would have to defer to Albert on that. We've kind of talked about both approaches, and I was thinking we could collaborate with you to kind of talk about our concerns of building into the tool. I think we'd have a preference towards that, assuming like we're a small team that gets pulled in a lot of directions just like you. So assuming we have the capacity to do that, that's where we'd have a preference towards. It's just about trying to see results and then figuring out the right way to balance the people's time that we have.
for sure. It seems super interesting too, because with the TFF just really taking a config mapping, you don't really have to build that mapping in TFF. You could build it using whatever kind of mechanism you want. So you could do the same Shopify approach and just generate a mapping file that's compatible with TFF, and then you're golden.
Yeah, that was the way that I think we see the fastest way to get to that point is just generating mapping. The questions I think we had for you is, does it make sense to even build the mapping generation functionality into TFF, because it feels like it's more general purpose? Like it's supposed to be more than just Ruby, and we're going to be building like a Ruby dynamic and mapping analysis generation. Or is that a different component that maybe fits in the same ecosystem that you all are working in with the tool? Those are some of the questions. And again, if we could set up just a sync with your stakeholders, me and Albert, I can provide some times, I can provide some times in the agenda on when that can work, or in Slack. But those are the things we'd want to work through ahead of Q4, so that we can get a KR potentially to support a shared direction on that. And I say we, I mean Engineering Productivity Family KR to do that.
That sounds great.
Sorry, I missed some.
Does that help?
There, but
yeah, I can talk through the metrics, but like I said, we're not. We're seeing cost per pipeline, I think, go down like 5 cents because the short circuit rate is about 1 to 2%. So we're not necessarily seeing the volume of pipelines cancel, which is a good thing. That means developers are likely running unit tests that apply most locally. Like we have some good practices, but we're not seeing the pipeline reductions that we were targeting.
Well, yeah. What's the overall failure rate versus 1 to 2%? Like what? So I guess what's like the miss rate when we see that 1 to 2% of pipelines are short circuiting?
We don't measure that yet, actually. So like, are you saying how often is the impact job passing and other RSpec jobs failing when you say the miss rate?
Yeah. I guess I don't have any context for like, is 2%. Are we still missing like half the jobs, like 3/4? Like I don't have a good sense of that at all.
Yeah, so we're not measuring that right now. That's a critical measurement to answer your question. Albert and I are pairing this evening my time to get that together. We just had some other metric demands pulling at our time and attention. Haven't picked this one up yet. Yeah. So I'll report back in Slack when we get that, like when we have the chart, so that you can at least ask more questions.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah.
Cool. So we had talked earlier today in our meeting about the next steps for us for TFF, taking some of that work that engineering productivity had done around the short circuit or failing the pipeline when it finds failures, and working that back into the template so it is more general purpose available for the template. Would we be able to pick that up fairly soon? Or is that at a point where it's can be built back into the template?
I think our implementation is very opinionated. So this would be another thing where having a discussion with Albert would be better than having a discussion with just me, unfortunately. Like I feel that I'm failing as an internal stakeholder right now.
No worries.
But
Kyle, that's what I told him in the last meeting.
Right. I would put it up to you all to see if you want to take like an opinionated Ruby implementation and bring it back into the template. We kind of have a general purpose, build a mapping in one job, and then it feeds into the TFF in another one. So that part might be able to come back in. Maybe one thing that we can do async with Albert. So instead of having a synchronous session, is maybe Albert, I can just set up some time for Albert to talk me through the jobs. We can record it, put it on unfiltered, share it with you, and then we can kind of see what would collaborate async on doing that. I can create the issue to record a video and mention you all when we get it.
Yeah, I think there's probably different components that we could, I don't know, figure out a way, like we could spend our own time figuring out a way how to take what you all have done and generalize it and maybe come up with something that's a little bit more general purpose and then build that into a template somehow. Because I think that the real kind of nifty part is the canceling jobs that are in flight when you detect failures. So I think that's what people would want in their template, along with the mapping part. So we can kind of like maybe even have those two separately and then show how people could compose them. That might add a lot of value to projects we want to fail early.
Yeah, and right now we have like I'll say like scripts, like bash scripts essentially, that do the API calls to cancel the pipeline. So it's nothing, there's nothing built into the CI configuration that does that short circuiting for us because we're not blocking the RSpec jobs with this one. They're running in parallel. So we're trying to short circuit jobs that are actually executed in parallel until we feel confident that we're able to condense the number of tests that are run.
I think even that would be valuable to people to kind of to build in. I actually like that it's not like built into the product. That's just a bunch of kind of bash scripts and API calls, because that if we can package that and then people can customize it in order to do other things, then that's even better. So
yeah, I'm going to make a note and just an action in my to-do-list and on here. So it's transparent to create the issue, set up some time with Albert to talk through the pipeline, talk through the different components, record it, and then we can try to collaborate async first. And if we need to have a synchronous session with Albert, me, and other stakeholders, you all, we can set that up. But let's try to do async first here.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks, Kyle. All right, I'm gonna jump back up then. I wanted to do a bit of a deep dive on the upcoming code quality epic that the team will be picking up. I want to first talk through the problems to solve that we've identified from a combination of customer interviews, the open dogfooding issues that are out there, and discussions with internal stakeholders who wrote those dogfooding issues. So the three big ones that we'll be looking to solve and feel like once we do that, we'll get more widespread adoption of code quality jobs, useful code quality data within GitLab internal stakeholders or internal customers. The problem is I don't know how important any particular item is that was reported. Today, the code quality issues just show up flat. You see things that are new and you see things that are fixed in the not test summary widget. I'm so used to talk about test history that that's the thing that's stuck in my head. In the MR widget. And then within the report, it's just here's all of the violations, but again, no sort of severity. So the team is picking up in 13.6, I believe, the first issue there, which will expose severity. It comes on a basically 1 to 5 scale of informational up to critical, I think. That'll have that data available. So we think that solves for that problem. So then as you're looking at the code quality MR widget, you'll understand this is a critical issue. So more matches up with what security does today, or SAST and NAST do today. The next one is that the code quality reports are noisy and hard to use during a code review, and that people don't care about low priority issues. So I kind of combine these two into one. There's two separate features here, two issues that we're talking about. One is pulling code quality data into the MR diff. What I've heard over and over from folks is that as I'm doing a code review, like I see in the MR that there are new violations found, or that there are violations found from the code quality scan, but I don't have an easy way to see if that's in the code that I'm reviewing. So by exposing that in a similar fashion to what's recently happened with the test coverage, we make that much more readily available to the reviewer, so they can see if this is code that, or a violation that's in the new code or near the new code, and there might be some opportunity then to go in and fix that violation and improve the overall quality. And then not caring about low priority issues. We have an MVC written up to, within your GitLab CI YAML, set basically the floor at which you want to see violations. So if you don't care about informational or low, whatever that's lowest one is, you can say, don't care about these as part of the code quality job or extending the template. And those just don't show up in the UI. So you would start to see a lot better signal and not just a lot of noise about informational, maybe linting errors or things like that that you just don't care about. And then the last big one, and this is one from, and definitely from the internal customers, is my team can't enforce the code quality is important without a big workaround. So creating some sort of your own custom scripting that goes and looks at the code quality job, or the code quality report understands if it's new violations, so it does its own diff against something coming from your default or your target branch, and then failing the job or failing the pipeline if there is that case. We want to build that in so that there is that quality gate of sorts, similar to SAST and DAST, of, hey, you can't merge this MR because you have new quality problems. So those are the big issues that we've heard about. And after that overview, wanted to open it up and see, are there questions there? Are there other things that our internal customers have heard or the team has heard that I've missed from customers or internal folks that we should be paying attention to and considering as part of this epic?
I think going back to the middle one, the reports are noisy. I think that's, we talked about this in our last call, and Drew and I have talked about this quite a bit, but I think a lot of that's due to the comparison that the MR widgets are invoking. And this is a problem with the SAST and DAST reports as well. When merge result pipelines is enabled, the two reports that it compares in order to determine what is new for that merge request is not quite right. And that's why you get a lot of times in the MR widgets, you'll see 437 new violations found or new security vulnerabilities found, and it's really just a front end change or something like that. And so the MR widget data almost seems like it's nonsensical. So we had kind of narrowed that down into like the actual commits that are attached to certain reports that are being compared as incorrect. We have a kind of plan moving forward to fix that. That is in the current milestone. So hopefully we can fix that up for the code quality and then kind of shop that around to the other MR widgets and see if we can kind of help them out with those noisy comparisons as well.
Yep.
That was going to be the, I was going to say, that was the feedback that I've heard from engineers is when I'm looking at the MR widget, when it was enabled, I'll say, but when I'm looking at the MR widget, the number of issues is just very confusing. Like, what is actionable to me within this MR? What is something I need to create an issue for and resolve outside? Those sort of workflows weren't really clear.
Yeah, and I think a large part of that is because the way that the comparison was working when merge result pipelines was turned on just wasn't quite right. Drew, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but basically we were comparing the report as it was generated in the merged result commit, the ephemeral commit. We were comparing that to the report that was generated at where the merge request branched from. So basically anything new that happens in the main branch in between that is getting associated with that merge request when it shouldn't be.
That makes sense. Okay. Yeah, and like you said,
Yeah.
SAST and DAST, it's the same. Sorry, Drew. SAST and DAST is the same sort of feedback. Go ahead, though.
Yeah, and I think that if we solve this problem well for code quality, we should be able to help out with the SAST and DAST widgets as well.
Yeah, if it works, it's an approach we'll take for all of our own widgets. I don't remember. Accessibility report would have this problem. I don't think maybe browser performance does as well. I can't think of the rest off the top of my head. But yeah, definitely
anything that is any report being diffed in a merge request in a merge request in a project that's using pipelines for merged results. I'm nearly certain to have this problem. Now that I'm saying this out loud, there's a few that are implemented in kind of interesting ways that manage to sidestep this, but it's a broad problem. I think it affects the majority. It's like the idea of base and head pipeline is a little bit out of sync, so it should affect most of those widgets.
And the thing that I would say I'm most excited for is seeing something in the MR diff on this. So like, I don't know how that would be exposed, but once code coverage was turned back on, there was a lot of thumbs up. I think you all saw a few, but a lot of positive feedback there.
I'll link to JJ's working on design in the current milestone, and there's some prior design that we're starting from. I don't know. It's pretty old. I will caveat it with when the issue was originally written up a couple of years ago. So this may evolve. I expect that this will evolve to something that more closely matches our current standards and how we understand customers want to interact with the app. But I'll link that issue in as soon as I find it. So you can see what it would look like and follow along as that design evolves.
James, overall, with these three issues, you, I think, really hit the nail on the head, especially the first two, which kind of lead to the third one. And the teams that I've worked with, they haven't even really considered the third one so much because of the problems in the first two.
Yeah, that was what I heard from, I think it's the GitLab team, was they really wanted to enforce code quality, but until you could like understand how it was changing in relation to the MR, they didn't want to bother with it because it was just too painful. So they just kind of moved it along. The other interesting thing I've heard this week from external customers, but I don't know that it impacts us internally, our internal customers, is a request to be able to handle multiple code quality jobs in the same pipeline and grab all those results together, similar to what we do with JUnit reports. So there's a customer I talked to who has multiple linting jobs that run separately, and then they want to pull all of that together. And in, I think both of these cases, they're customizing or they're reformatting the output so that it matches the code climate spec so that they can see it in GitLab. The other one is a very unique case of their sidestepping having to buy an ultimate license by using the open source SAS scanning and then reformatting that into code climate JSON so that they can see it as part of the code quality report. So, and that is a required job as part of the pipeline. Yeah, right, super creative. But that is stomping all of the other linting jobs that are happening because they run before the security job runs, and it's a required bit of the pipeline that runs towards the end. So you see all of your security violations that are part of your change, and you see none of your linting errors for front end, back end, whatever it might be. So they want to be able to combine all of those reports. So that problem is not currently one to solve as part of the Epic, but those are highly upvoted issues externally and something that customers are asking for. So that might make an appearance in this Epic as we move along, just to be able to also solve that problem externally. But I don't think it's going to be the top of the list for us.
I had a question, and might be getting way ahead here, but related to just dog fooding. I know there's the MR to bring it back in the GitLab project. Have you all considered starting with a project that might have a simpler workflow, just to get like we talked about how merge results is a problem. I'm sure there's a few satellite projects that don't use that, and maybe that's already happening, and I'm not aware of it. Is that something that's being talked about or considered?
Yeah, there's a couple of different dog fooding issues out there. So we're talking to a couple of different groups about,
Got it.
as we release features, starting to use it.
Yeah, I think we've previously worked with Runner, and James was mentioning that he was talking to GitLab. So we do kind of shop our ideas around to smaller projects. First, I think Runner had the coverage stuff going before we put it on the main, or we made the MR to get it into the, or you made the MR to get it into the main GitLab project. I don't remember how that all played out, but
I think it was Drew or someone on testing did that. So, which we're super grateful for. So thank you for that.
Awesome. Well, any other topics we should pick up? Anything else we should deep dive on from the roadmap deck?
So I don't have it up, but I saw, again, there was some things in the roadmap where dog fooding was like mentioned. Is there something that we can do, or efforts that we can do to, just speaking more like strategically here, not trying to sign us up for work immediately, but is there anything that you all are looking at that we just aren't moving the needle on that just needs some attention?
Can't think of anything off the top of my head.
Okay.
For me, the next two things that I'm thinking about dog fooding wise and trying to understand why for categories that are minimal, that we don't have more widespread adoption internally, are usability and browser performance. And so I'll start working with product managers on, hey, are you starting to look at, are you using visual reviews? Are you using review apps? What is a better way for you to get the feedback? Why aren't you using these tools? I'm kind of laser focused on that persona for that feature because it's one that is near and dear to my heart as a product manager, of a much easier way to leave feedback on an MR, especially a visual type component. And how maybe we can partner that up with some design features and really get those two things together and working really well. So I don't think there's anything, it's a long way of saying, no, we don't need your help on that one. I don't think right now, Kyle. And then browser performance, I don't know. I went through a similar exercise of talking to some of the folks on quality about browser performance and the new pipeline that was put into place to do that testing and where there were gaps in our solution for it. So I think we've identified those and they're sitting in the Epic. That's as far as I got in that process though, because we had so much other work ahead of it. And then we'll go back through and do some validation again with the internal folks to make sure those are still the right problems to solve, and work on getting just the template being used as our browser performance kind of standard.
Thank you. Yeah,
Nick, thanks for joining us.
Hey, sorry I'm late. I was in the SaaS call and jumping in where I can.
No worries. We'll let you catch up on what we talked through async, but were there any topics that you wanted to deep dive on now that you're here?
No, I'm following along the next iteration of test file finder. I think it's landing, so I'll catch up async. But yeah, looking forward to see if that's adding to the cost reduction. And we've seen if cost reduces, it has a ripple effect in duration as well, as long as it's not paralyzed. So I'm looking to see the outcome of that.
Yeah, and just briefly, I think we're not achieving the short circuit rate that we anticipated. So looking ahead to the end of Q3, start of Q4, to look at the dynamic test mapping portion as well. So something that can give us a little bit better mapping so that we can hopefully detect errors, or at least start to refine the number of jobs that we run within an MR as we evaluate the miss rate.
Cool, so it's already implemented. We're just watching.
We've implemented a base solution and we're measuring the results. Albert and I need to come up with a Sisense measure on the that hit miss rate, where it's how often is the short circuit job passing and other RSpec jobs failing. Like if we're doing unit tests, for example, how often are unit tests failing, and trying to figure out how to refine the mapping or just move towards that dynamic mapping.
Will there be a period of time where the pipeline spend or the time for pipeline actually increases before we can get to a state where we're comfortable only running the mapped tests, and then we see a large reduction?
Yeah, good question. We're actually hitting that right now. So because we added a new job, it's a small increase. That's where we're almost offsetting the decreases that we're seeing when we short circuit, because every pipeline now probably has like 2.5 cents for that job. I think that's our average. So I think this job is a little bit higher than the average. I should say build. That's the average build price for a pipeline is 2.5 cents. So we're hoping to see a small increase so that we can see a bigger decrease in the future, in the next probably two months or so.
Right, and that's kind of toward more what the Shopify blog had in the dynamic analysis, figuring out exactly what tests we need to run for a given MR, and then only running those.
Yep.
Yeah, I just want to voice some of the realization from other technologies I've seen. With any dynamic mapping, there's a period of calibration. Tesla has their camera where it just recalibrates itself when you drive for a month. I think we will need to move to some form where you enable it for a while and you gather data, and from then you use that to help make better decisions on what tests to run. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the path we take. It will add on to the benefit once you have it on for a while.
I would also expect once we start testing smarter, just to put a general name to it, we're going to see more failures in master, because that will surface areas where our mapping isn't good enough immediately. So our pipeline stability is going to decrease as well. We're trying to figure out the right balance between price, stability, and duration. Those are all three different things that we can tune in different ways, but you usually have to give one to get one on something else. Not always, but there's the trade-offs there.
Yeah, I think in order to avoid that, you'd have to kind of take on the cost of running both of these strategies in parallel, and then only switch over when you felt like the stability was at a spot where you felt comfortable.
Yep, and that's a part of that plan to implement dynamic mapping, where we're doing both in parallel. We're likely going to do it for a month. That's what we've been talking about internally. We'll just kind of have to see what the results are as we do it, but we want to feel really comfortable because our team is that first line of defense when there is a master failure. And in US afternoon hours, it's just me. So I especially have, I'll say, a vested interest in making sure we're good. Not that other people don't help, because lots of people help out. Yeah, I want to make sure that my afternoons are not fixing master failures all day long.
Sorry, I was typing out a localized now. Just a slight reminder. I see that we're doing this in the main repo, just to make sure that we're adding value broadly and it can be used in multiple cases. Did we get to check back in the customer portal if this mapping would help them? Because when we enabled this first, I think we were adding more time because the project was so small. Is there a plan to go back and see if the dynamic mapping will be better there?
That is something I kind of had in my backlog, Mac, because I was involved in the initial part of it. And I'm actually meeting with Albert tonight. Are you meeting with Albert tonight too, Kyle?
Yeah, I think I'm a little after you.
Okay, all right. So yeah, just to better understand, since I've had a decent look at the customer portal to figure out how well it would apply just straight over with what we have.
I have a gut feeling where it's not. So a lot of the logic that we have in GitLab is to short circuit pipelines on jobs that are leveraged very highly, where we have lots of parallel builds. And in customer portal, there's just not that test volume. That's not to say that we can't, but I think the current iteration that we have is likely not going to benefit small projects that don't have to have 20 different builds running there, 20 builds simultaneously running the unit tests. Maybe a project like Gitly or Runner, it could benefit, but Zeph, you have better insight into that portal project than I do.
No, I think you're right. And that was my initial thoughts about it, but I felt like I had to do my due diligence and take a better look at Albert's implementation to see if there could be some overlap. My first impression was no, there isn't some overlap here that we could make a lot of use of.
Yeah, I feel like the larger the project with the more tests and the longer it takes to run a pipeline, the more likely you're going to be able to see a benefit from short circuiting that pipeline in terms of cost and in terms of saving developers time. I'm curious as to if anybody has any ideas on how you could maybe like simulate where that break-even point is, like where in the duration of pipelines or in how many tests that your project has, how can we kind of suss out where you're going to see value from short circuiting a pipeline run?
No ideas, but I'll noodle on it. Like I'll think on it. Yeah, it's tough problem to solve. Going back to what we talked about earlier that Mech missed, I was going to record a video with Albert talking about the components and the implementation, and then we were going to regroup with the testing team to just look at what can be brought into the template. And then I think it could be leveraged by other products easier to make that evaluation versus just like a general gut feel, which is what we're talking about right now.
Yeah, I wonder if after your experiment is done and we kind of figure out how often on average we get a short circuit, we could kind of plug that probability into a simulation and then use that to determine when the cutoff would be.
Sounds plausible. Yeah, I definitely agree. That's the way to go now.
Cool. Mick, I like your suggestion on the slight tweak to the internal customers. I'll get an MR open to tweak that today to have Kyle's group be the primary and Joanna's group be just another potential internal customer stakeholder.
Yeah, thanks for that. So yeah, Seth, I didn't mean to add additional pressure. Just set a due date, and if it needs to move, just move the date. There's a lot of things going on in your team, so want to make sure that I'm sensitive to that. So my read from the handbook is that Kyle's team is doing great work, and from the handbook it sounds like Joanna is doing double duty, being both QEM counterpart. So we can divide up that role and make sure we hate to use the term divide and conquer, but it's more specific and more focused on those roles. And Joanna also can be the main counterpart to this group and stuff, but it sounds like that Kyle is using it more, and there's a lot of good feedback coming in there. Thanks for that.
Cool. Well, it looks like we can give some time back to everyone.
Thank you. Appreciate it, James.
All right. Thanks, folks. Thanks for the feedback today. Appreciate it. Cheers.